All right, Luthemplar, welcome back to the Jay Burden Show. How are you doing, man?
Mildly ill at slowly counterbalancing with toxification of alcohol.
See, that's the cure, right? Is that you just have to balance out with other substances, until you achieve like a golden meat. So it's like an upper, a downer, and then you just kind of like average yourself out, right?
I like to call it D-maxing, the way John D does his bourbon every show with AA.
All right, I thought you were going somewhere else with that, but you know what? I approve of that. I also say I can't say that much because I think I probably have a finger of bourbon in basically every episode, which isn't a problem if you're doing it for work, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, enough about that. This is actually for everyone at home. This is a part two of a show we did about a week ago, and because it's a part two, I do recommend obviously you guys watch that episode first. There are some things that won't make sense. We're gonna do a recap, but obviously we're gonna assume, for the sake of discussion, that you're on the same page as we are. And also, this is specifically about a book. This is a series rather written by a Chinese author. The Three Body Problem, Dark Forest, and what's the name of the full series again? Luthemplar as One Piece.
It goes by many names, but it's officially known as the Remembrance of Earth's Past.
Right, and so obviously, if you haven't read this, first one you should, because it's quite good. It's worth your time, but you're going to miss out on some things, and you should accept that if you go forward, right? And yes, falling outside the normal world constraints, this is live. Anyway, so I'll give us kind of a Flash Gordon recap of what happened in the first book and partially through the second, which is where we were when we ended our conversation. So in the first book, we basically hear the story of first contact, right, where Earth civilization contacts an alien civilization known by Trisolaris, so called because they live in a solar system with 3 suns, and the 3 suns have such an unpredictable orbit that the planet where the Trisolarans live, it basically is extremely hostile to life. There is no predictable season. So there are chaotic eras where the temperature vacillates wildly, and stable eras where it's some semblance of normal. And so this has meant that the society is essentially desperate to get out and looking for someplace else. And our main character in the first book, who's kind of this boomer shitlib, is so horrified by the environmental degradation and so horrified with human nature that when she hears from this alien civilization, the first thing she hears back is essentially from another pacifist who basically says, don't ever respond, because if we hear from you again, we're going to come kill you. Like, we need your planet. And she, in kind of like this fit of nihilism, basically says, like, all right, you can have it. And so what that means is that there is a 400-year countdown timer to when this advanced alien species arrives on Earth. And that's kind of the backdrop that the plot is set up against. And so in the modern day, the UN basically decides that we need to counter this alien threat coming in 400 years. And because these aliens are so advanced, and we won't get into exactly how in this short summary, they've basically put a hard cap on human technology. They have, kind of cracked quantum computing. And so they've developed these, dimensional supercomputers, right? Supercomputers, which are folded up into be, smaller than an atom. And they can be essentially almost anywhere at once, relaying information back to the Trisolarans within an instant.
Yeah.
And so this means that, any information that is written down, any information that is digital, they have access to. And also, they have put a hard cap on human progress. So you can't innovate yourself out of this. And so the UN decides to create what they call the Wall Facer Project, which essentially is a dictatorship where 4 people are given the ability to do whatever they want, as long as they keep their plan, their great plan, entirely in their own head. And so this brings us to the second book, where our character Luo Ji initially just blew everything off and said, all right, my plan is to go live in the mountains with a super hot girl. That's my plan. Eventually, they decide, no, you're not allowed to do that, because the first 2 wall facers have been killed. Their plans didn't work. And it is interesting because out of all of the wall facers, the only one that the Trisolarians seem to be scared of is Luo Ji, which is odd because at this point he's seen as largely useless. And
Aliens
so,
fear the drunkard.
right. And so we've essentially got to the point where Luoji has made his only real demand, which is that he is cast what he calls a spell. And so in this world, the same way that our main character in the first book, who made contact with Trisolaris, and Luoji, the way they operated his spell is the same. They've essentially used the sun as a giant antenna to amplify information. And so what Luoji did is he transmitted coordinates of a barren planet, or a barren star, rather, out into the universe, an omnidirectional signal. And after that, he entered into hibernation. And so that's where we left off last time. Luthemplar, is there anything you want to add to that summary?
Yeah, I think one thing in the first book that we may have skipped a bit is I think the first book does a good job of giving you sympathy for the devil, if you will. By the end of the first book, I did genuinely feel bad for the aliens, and I was like, well, I mean, we should probably find something place for them to go take a hike to. But in the second book, you kind of like realize the levels that these aliens are willing to go to get out of their prison planet, essentially. And so like there's still a bit of a mystery where we left off of like why are the aliens afraid of the guy that's doing nothing versus the other like wall facers who are trying their best to figure out ideas, and some of these ideas as it's revealed are suicidal, and yet even though some of these ideas risk destroying the very planet that the Trisolarians want to take, for some reason or another the aliens never really give a damn, or at least they feel confident they can countermeasure it. And so, what is this spell? We don't learn about the spell initially in the second book. First, we see like the real first contact physical when a probe arrives from the Trisolarians. This is a probe that was sent faster than the main invasion fleet. There's no one on the probe. It's just a first contact probe. The humans are thinking maybe this is they're going to sue for peace because we've gotten advanced now. But throughout the second book, it's kind of hinted that this is a delusion of humanity. The first major hint we get is one of the main characters who are being brought back from hibernation, which is a technology we mentioned last show. Just a side note, like hibernation is being used to allow people to do generational planning against aliens. One of the generational planners, this physicist, he finds out in 200 years in the future, he can still teach physics, and he kind of gets the hunch we're not as advanced as we think. If I can still teach kids the same physics from 200 years ago, we're fooling ourselves. And so he kind of gives a warning to some of the ships in the first contact scenario. Listen, something's up. Get ready to get the heck out of here. Get out of Dodge the second anything goes wrong. And where we leave off right before the spell is talked about in the second book, we see several ships that listened to this physicist are now escaping the solar system in like full speed reverse, basically. The probe turned out to be what's known as strong matter, which is a really cool science fiction topic, just from a science fiction perspective. To briefly mention what that is, all matter is all atoms are held together by a strong force which we have not yet figured out how to release from the nuclei of an atom. If you could bind atoms together into a macro atom, and not a molecule. A molecule is the assembly of atoms into a larger structure. This would be an assembly of it would be more like expanding the size of the proton, which or rather expanding the size of the nuclei, which is a radically different concept. Scientists have been trying to do this in real life for a long time, but the strong force is self-contained, so you can't actually rip it open. And so, like, the author here makes a really clever idea. Well, the aliens just straight up found a way to like make this unbeatable force of metal that can like turn 30 degrees on a split of a hair and blow up 1,000 ships at high speed.
And so the point is, we
sorry.
have this realization that, and this is important in the context, but I want to give people kind of the big picture while we're doing a summary, that the probe, right, the initial contact, which was viewed as possibly even being a surrender, ultimately destroys the entire human military. And so humanity kind of falls, or is panicking, right, because their best shot, that their big moment of triumphalism, like, oh, we're gonna accept the surrender of our foes, it results in essentially the destruction of their entire power base, right?
Yeah, and this is kind of an interesting note, but like it's due to the scale of defeat that the scientists of Earth are willing to like look at literally any alternatives to their assumed competence. It's kind of like the Dunning-Kruger graph. They've hit the valley of despair now, and it's at that point where some of them discover this weird like spell that this like 21st century scientists cast on a star, and they're willing to look at mysticism at this point. And turns out that star has been destroyed from that spell. You can talk about that if you want.
Right. So essentially, at this point, Luoji, our main character from the last book, is viewed as like a historical curiosity. The same way we would view like crazy Cold War projects, where they investigated psychics, right? They're viewed as, essentially, completely disgraced. And the spell, quote unquote, because that's all he would refer to it as, is his spell, was a series of coordinates that he, bounced out to the universe at large. And these coordinates led to, a star with nothing around it, just a star that was kind of close enough,
We hope
to
nothing's
be
around
observed.
it.
Right. Yeah, we hope. And what happened is when these scientists are essentially reeling, they go back and they're like, wait a minute, wasn't there this crazy guy who had this idea? And what he said before he went into hibernation is keep looking at this star, like just keep an eye on it. And so, of course, they found out which star he was talking about, and they looked back at it, and they found out that it had been destroyed, completely destroyed. And they don't know why. And so they wake up Luoji basically to ask him, like, well, okay, like, why? What was it? And do you want to, why did these coordinates being broadcasted to the universe result in, the complete destruction of this star?
Yeah. Spoiler alert. At this point, we're gonna go deep into spoilers that we didn't even cover in part 1. So up to this point, we didn't do the big reveal. But the Woji figures, I guess you could say there's always a bigger fish. and
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
and he figures if there's a big enough fish that is paranoid and it sees a bunch of coordinates of where a civilization are, it might just decide better safe than sorry. Aim the shotgun down the hatch, right? Turns out his spell worked. He discovers that somewhere out there is what he calls a hunter civilization, a hunter probe, a hunter alien. It's not known, but this force or alien in the universe saw the coordinates, figured this is a really dumb civilization broadcasting itself to the universe. I don't want competition. I'm going to destroy that star. And using the probes that humanity had, they could see from their telescopes that it wasn't just a natural phenomenon. A high-speed photon of immense density struck the star at light speed and basically supernovaed it. So this was a clear weapon by this unknown hunter. And so essentially what Lyoji does that messes up with Tristellar's plan is, if we can't beat you, we'll find someone who can. and this like becomes known, of course, the book spawned the theory, Dark Forest theory. The idea that given a large enough scale and enough infinite possibilities of the universe, civilizations will typically favor destroying each other before contact out of security concerns. Because you don't know how advanced or primitive another civilization is when you first contact them, and it's essentially always safer to shoot first. You have a very low chance of meeting a friend, and a very high chance of survival if you make that unknown force a corpse first before you know if they're friend or foe. It's a bit of a dark theory, but I also kind of like it a lot because you could argue, well, why have we found aliens yet? Is it really that the universe, that we're this super special, unique planet in the universe, or that everyone else is smart enough to hide and we're not?
Well, right. And so that's what is brought up, that there's essentially this new form of game theory. And it's essentially revealed that that's why this character, Luoji, is viewed as dangerous, because he was the first one to realize essentially the game theory of the universe. And it's based on, a couple premises, right? Which is one, life always expands. Two, there is scarcity. And what this means is, especially over, universal time, right? Essentially over billions and billions of years, a large number of species, almost infinite numbers of civilizations have existed and do exist. And all of them are, expanding with limited resources. And because the differences between civilizations are so great, that you can never really communicate with anyone else. So you can never really be sure that anyone is as actually, benevolent. And so you have to, because again, you could be, a very young civilization interacting with an extremely advanced one. You always could be facing someone who can outgun you. And so the play is, like you said, it's always safer to shoot first. And so essentially it means that this is what he calls the dark forest, right? Hence the name of the book. That everyone is in the dark, and everyone has, in the analogy, right? Everyone is both a hunter and hunted, and everyone has to be quiet so they don't reveal their position. But the moment someone does, everyone leans towards them. Everyone turns around, because obviously everyone has the ability to essentially eliminate everyone else, or, reveal them to someone else who could. And so essentially, the moment anyone is known, they're instantly destroyed. And in the case of this curse, they don't even actually know where it came from. It's never revealed who actually destroyed the star. And what this has allowed is this essentially sets up a Cold War style mutually assured destruction.
Yeah.
Because the more signals sent out from an area, the easier it is to tell where those signals are coming from.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, there's a few extra points there to mention. The reason why this system works is basically the limit of the speed of light. By the time you say hello to anyone, like I wrote a Substack article about this, and you can imagine, due to the time scales, like imagine a Roman emperor says hello to an alien planet. By the time he gets a reply, it'll be Charlemagne. You can't actually trust that the person you say hello to, when they get back to you, is even the same civilization, the same ethics, the same culture. Like, even if they say they're the most progressive whatever lollipop country you want, by the time you even reply to them, they may be like some crazy genocidal dictatorship. The time scales are too long for communication. And once you can't communicate, you can only suspect. And this is the other factor of the dark forest, and why it works is what's called the chain of suspicion, where it's just like the chain of suspicion instantly starts once you can't communicate instantly, and it will inevitably lead to someone shooting first for their safety. Simply because, like the Trisolarians showed, when they sent the invasion force, their main concern was if Earth was going to be more advanced when the invasion force arrived in 400 years. Trisolarians knew from the start, like, we're taking a gamble. We may not have this, and eventually they figure that they could invent these, like you said, the dimensional computers to mess with human science. And they basically do every precaution they can to prevent Earth from catching up to them, because they know that even if they invade, by the time that they get to Earth, Earth could be ahead of them. And so that the main tactics of war is not firepower, but rather delaying the building of firepower, which is kind of a cool idea. I think it's like a long form war. But you can go more into like the Cold War strategies of what this, what does the once Luoji realizes the spell works, how does he get Trisolaris to stop? Right.
So if I'm not mistaken, what actually is revealed is that the Trisolarans realize at once, that he's right. And so what they do is, and I don't remember exactly how, because it's been a month and a half since I've read this, but they essentially they put a block. They basically lock out the ability of Earth to broadcast.
Yeah,
because they realize all of a sudden, oh, he knows. Because Luoji's plan is basically to say, all right, if you guys come here, I will broadcast 2 pieces of information. Where your planet is. And in doing that, indirectly, I will reveal where Earth is. Essentially, mutually assured destruction. Both of these places will be wiped out. And basically, he plans to do that the same way that Earth contacted other civilizations the first time, by using the sun. And they essentially realize that, freak out, understandably, and freeze their access to do that. Do you remember exactly how they do that?
Yeah, so the probe that destroyed the human fleet, that wasn't its main goal. Its main goal was not to destroy the human fleet. It had to destroy the human fleet to accomplish its main goal, which was to fly straight to the sun, and essentially use that strong force I mentioned to expand itself and put out a resonance frequency to shut down anything Earth sends. So this indestructible radio, you can think of it as as an indestructible sound canceller, essentially. It flies to the sun, and anytime humanity tries to use the sun to broadcast a signal, because like I mentioned before, the sun can amplify signals, it will just cancel the signal, so Earth can't send any signals out. And so that's essentially the way in which they hold on a second.
That's essentially the way that they turn off Earth's ability to talk to everyone else, right?
Yeah. Sorry, I got cut off.
And so once this is revealed, people kind of start to hate Luoji, like slowly at first, but they basically look at him as having failed, because even though he revealed to humanity the true nature of the universe, he wasn't able to turn that into a real victory, right? Even though he figured it out too late. And it seems at this point, right, the Trisolarans got ahead of him, that they got them. And so what happens is that Luoji basically gets recruited as a scientist working on a Hail Mary project. And this project basically involves, scattering dust, around the solar system to act as kind of like an early warning system. We haven't mentioned it, but at multiple points in this book, the way that humanity has tracked the arrival of this fleet is by watching, their wake, so to speak, and watching them go through dust. And so the logic essentially goes, well, we can create a closer version of that, in our civilization. We'll use it as like a buoy in a harbor to tell, like, oh, are they making a wake? And the Trisolarans basically look at this and like, there's no harm in it. There's nothing to be done. It's not going to stop us coming here. But essentially, and over the course of this, Luoji descends to basically being like a homeless man. He's described as stinking, as, just like spending all of his time on essentially a useless project,
So,
and everyone hates him. Sorry, carry on, man.
No, I was going to say, it's kind of funny because if you actually know a little bit of Eastern meditation techniques, this is wall facer meditation. you like withdraw from the world, you stare at a freaking wall all your life, and you just let your mind run wild. Some of them go drunk and do drugs while doing it, but like you stare at a wall and you like do everything you can to amplify your imagination staring at that wall. And so Luoji essentially is becoming a true wall facer. But like you said, like as far as the Trisolarans are aware, this is just like a man who was too late and now is reduced to this like minuscule task of stupid activities that won't do anything. So like of course he'd go drinking, of course he'd be depressed. He failed, so we can stop bothering with this guy. We won. Of course, it turns out if you want to go into the next step, or have any other thoughts about like this this illusion that Luoji is playing in the role of.
Right. Okay. Falling Outside the Moral Constraints for $10 just sent finishing up book 1 tonight. Read it because of the last stream. Really enjoyed it for the most part. Don't love the end as much. Aliens Were Better as a mystery. Got book 2 ready to go. Thanks for the recommendation. Well, I would say out of all of them, and we'll probably finish discussing the series tonight by hook or by crook. The second book is by far my favorite. The second book, this kind of like game theory situation that we've described, is gone into in much greater detail, and it's really an interesting logical puzzle to put yourself in. So 1, thank you for your $10. 2, stop listening to this. And 3, get back to me when you finish it because I want to hear what you think about it. But anyway, right? I realize that's probably terrible for my audience telling them to leave, but nonetheless, I stand by it. Anyway, and so what's revealed in kind of this flash of brilliance is that what this guy was doing wasn't just some useless project, but what he has done is turned this dust, which he can, and this is not, again, I'm trying to, on one hand, give you enough details to understand what's going on, and on the other hand, not weigh you down with useless information. But the way that this project is set up is they have, these kind of like bombs set up that when detonated will just scatter this dust around, just to move it as far away, in over as much distance as possible. But what's revealed is that far from being random, our main character has essentially used the spacing of these to create what is essentially Morse code. So
yeah,
they
he basically treats the dust he's scattered across the earth as a tapestry he can write on with nuclear pens, nuclear bomb pens.
right. And so all of a sudden, this means that at the press of a button, he has the ability to transmit to this dark forest, right? This universe full of, people with itchy trigger fingers, the location of Trisolaris and the location of Earth, which means all of a sudden he has achieved, despite the fact that humanity has vastly less technology, because of this dark forest, he has achieved mutually assured destruction.
Yeah, and the way in which this is revealed to Tricelarians is pretty hilarious, right? We kind of skipped over it, but one day, Luoji wakes up, it gets evicted from his house because he's a sneaky drunk that's making the neighborhood's tax value go down, and so he like accepts his fate, leaves the house, and he brings I think he brings like a gun or something, and a few pieces of things, and he basically goes to the grave of the lady that the woman who made first contact. I forget her name. What Wenjie, I think, or something. Wenjie. And he goes to her grave thinking that the Tricelarian cell phones, the spying computers, might notice him and be like, "Oh, what's this all about?" And he basically like talks out into the cemetery, the empty cemetery, like, "Listen, I'm gonna kill myself because I hate my life, but I'm gonna take you with me if you don't stop this." And it's one of those like kind of like he offers the Tricelarians Canadian healthcare basically, and and all of a sudden three it wasn't just one, it was three monitoring computers, the Sophons, reveal themselves. They like expand from the dimension, so they still had him under incredible surveillance. There were three eyeballs on him, and they basically say, okay, we surrender. Basically, what do you want?
Right, because what he's done is he's basically linked these bombs, right? That this kind of like you said, a tapestry to a dead man switch, and he basically says, "I'm going to kill myself unless you do what I want."
We should say that the activation of the bombs are tied to his heartbeat. That's why he's going to kill himself.
Exactly. So the idea being, well, if he kills himself, his heart stops, the bombs explode, revealing these two locations. And it's interesting because I don't know if you remember from last time, guys, but we described the plans of the other wall facers, right? And the first one was kind of this American neocon, but the second is a very similar plan by Diaz, who is this kind of like South American strongman. And he plans a kind of a less intelligent version of the same idea. He basically says, well, I'll just make a bunch of nuclear bombs and blow them up, and I'll blow up the earth unless they leave us alone. I'm simplifying it, but that's essentially his plan.
Yeah, it's essentially.
And again, he accomplishes this by means of a dead man switch, right? And this is something that's discussed at length, kind of this idea of, the nuclear dead man switch, right? This idea that, Russia had this program, and the US likely did as well, that if they were wiped out in a nuclear first strike, well, their bombs would automatically, launch towards America, assuring that both civilizations would be destroyed if one made a first move.
Yeah, and this is also something that the aliens themselves were not really capable of understanding due to their biology, because the Tricelarians, their thoughts are projected on their heads, and that's how they communicate. Like they project their thoughts as a form of light, kind of like an octopus skin. They can't actually hide information from each other, and so the only way they can have military intelligence is essentially by not coming into contact with each other. If they ever come into contact with each other, they basically like spill the beans on their plans. And so the idea that the humans would have this like dead man switch, it's kind of an alien concept to them. They didn't expect this, and once they realized that they that's the point when the Tricelarians, they do ultimately bow to the human demands for now. But they gain a new respect for humanity as like, okay, you are actually a threat despite not having our technology.
Right.
Like,
and so this leads us into kind of a new stage, where
a new era.
essentially a new era, right? And this is again a common theme through the book, and this is why I like it, because it's a very Chinese book in the sense that no Westerner really thinks like this, nor could have written this book. And so it's kind of refreshing because a lot of sci-fi is, essentially like globalist fan fiction.
Yeah.
And one of the ways that it's that is that the world is organized into eras, and they all have different names and they all kind of represent different stages of this kind of like cosmic struggle between, humanity and these alien civilizations. And so this again, and we see this common motif of the wall facer. This starts a new era, and in this era, Luoji becomes a wall facer. Literally, he sits in front of a wall all day with a dead man's switch in his hand. And basically, the idea is that if anything is to happen, if the Trisolarans make a move, if they head for the Earth in any way, he's going to hit the button and he's going to essentially doom all human life. And essentially, the Trisolarans believe him. It's later revealed they've gamed this out. They've calculated it. And they calculate his threat rating is around 95%. Basically, they think that 95 out of 100 times they run the game or they run the simulation, he'd do it. He'd blow them both up. And so this essentially creates this kind of like uneasy stalemate between the two civilizations. The fleet turns away.
And this is something that's gone into more in book 3. At this point, we can go into book 3. But at the end of book 2, Luoji does, like, in the, it's called the deterrence era now. The crisis era was between first contact and when Luoji made his threat, and now it's called the deterrence era. The pacifist that first told Earth, or warned Earth, my civilization's violent, don't contact us, he's still alive. He was hibernating. The Trisolarians can hibernate too, like the humanity. And he wakes up basically to like thank Luoji for like achieving what he had hoped would happen, like a peaceful settlement. And so that the end of book 2 has this like beautiful line where like maybe we've sparked some light in the dark forest. It's not hopeless. Of course, in book 3 we discover that there's one weakness in any forest, be it Eden or the dark forest, and that is women.
So do you want to kind of launch into the initial hook of the first book?
A third book, or
sorry, the third book. Yes, I meant the next one. But you don't listen to what I say. Listen to what I mean.
I basically, the Trisolarians realized that as long as Luoji is what they call the sword holder, like the wall facer program's been retired, it kind of achieved its goals, and now they call it the sword holder, the guy who holds the doomsday button. Luoji holds that for a couple of decades, but he's getting old. Like he's now like entering his 90s or something, and so Trisolaris realizes they can't beat Luoji, but they can manipulate Earth to feel a little bit friendly. It's not so bad. We're friends now, right? And so the Trisolaris government begins essentially, I guess you could say they start pausing the Earth. they start pumping the Earth with mass media through the Sophon. The Sophons go from monitoring to essentially a interplanetary internet. And the Trisolarians are kind of forced to like pretend like they're helping humanity achieve new science. Although it's never quite stated if the Sophons are gone, right? They're clearly still there because they're using them to communicate. And so there's always this suspicion that, even though the Sophons are gone, it's weird that we're not having any new scientific achievements yet. And so there's always a suspicion that the Trisolarians are still not allowing humanity to progress scientifically. But now they're starting to pump the Earth full of essentially mass media that shows the Trisolarians as friendly, as like, oh, we get Earth culture. We're totally about this global homo stuff. You want to go into that a bit more?
Right. So there's several things that can make this book hard to summarize. One is that you jump around in time quite a lot, and so we're kind of jumping back and forth between two time periods. One, which is kind of the near future, right? Immediately after first contact, and then kind of the deterrence era, right? And we hop back and forth.
Oh yeah. Well, I forgot to mention, book 3 opens in the medieval era.
Book 3 does open in the medieval era.
Do you want to give a quick summary of your favorite Byzantine prostitute?
So
It
book
may not be.
three
It may not be
has.
relevant.
It's not. I'll put it this way. I'll tease it. I'll tease it because this is a completely accurate summary. And if you want to find out what the hell I'm talking about, well, you have to read it. Book three chronicles the adventures of a superpowered prostitute during the fall of Constantinople. And if you want to understand that, you're going to have to read this book.
Only in the first chapter. It's a little the author Shesheng Liu, he always has these bizarre out of like not science fiction openings for all of his books. Like in book one, it was this like random like communist revolution in China scene that isn't really science fiction. Book two, the opening, I forget what it was. It was like um I forget. I think it was like a generic like Panama adventure, and then book three is like the fall of Constantinople to the Ottomans. It's not exactly the kind of science fiction opening you'd expect.
Right. So essentially, when we're reading about the current time, like the closest time to us, I guess. So immediately after first contact in the third book, we're reading about essentially what was humanity's first couple of attempts at like long shot programs, right? So essentially, this time, which is again, there are many kind of like similarities drawn to the Cold War, that there are these new kind of like international agencies, right? What is the one in the third book? What is it called? It has some incredibly generic name.
The Staircase Program.
No, but it's the name of the government organization that does it.
Oh,
I can't remember.
Interplanetary Defense or Planetary Defense.
Right.
Commission?
Yeah, it's something that generic, right?
UN gobbledygook.
Exactly. And so what this program is essentially, it is kind of like the best and brightest of kind of like this international team, right? And so it's brought together, a series of kind of like bright scientists, and it's headed up by this essentially like brutal, kind of like extremely cynical CIA agent, Thomas Wade, who runs this program with kind of an iron fist, and he's described as being incredibly, yeah, exactly, it being incredibly brutal, and especially in kind of the current time, the author, it seems to imply that most people think he's kind of going too far. But we have kind of two characters. So we have this guy named Yun, which that's how you say his name, right? I can't speak Chinese.
I think so. Yeah.
And Yun and this woman, Cheng Xin, who is the main character of the third one. Essentially, these two people went to school together. And Cheng is basically
we're getting those classic high school anime
slice of, yes, exactly, right? Because she's this like this perfect girl, but this guy's basically an incel, and he's an incel with terminal cancer.
Dang.
And so yeah, it's a bit rough for him. And at this time, the UN, in an attempt to raise money, is running kind of a gimmick where they basically are like, all right, pay us millions of China dollars, and we will sell you a star. And so this main character, who has no friends, or this character, sorry, not the main character, who is this terminal cancer patient, has essentially come into a lot of money roughly a month or so before he's going to die. And he has no family. He doesn't want his sister to get it. And so just kind of on a lark, he decides to buy a star for this girl that he was friends with in college. He hasn't talked to in years. He's kind of a failure. And it's revealed that, in the intervening time, she has been kind of brought into this government project. And this government project has a Hail Mary idea that what they're going to do is they're essentially, and this is kind of stupid, but it turns out to not be such a bad idea, they're going to find someone who is going to die anyway, ask them to, voluntarily commit suicide so that they can essentially freeze dry their brain and send it into space with the hope that the Trisolarans can basically replicate a human. And the idea is like, oh, well, maybe if they understand us, they'll have sympathy on us. And so, this woman essentially is like, all right, well, I bet I could get this guy from college to kill himself. He seemed to like me.
It's such a ridiculous opening, but it's great.
It is. And the thing is, he does it. He goes for it. He's already going to die anyway. So it is revealed after his death she has no idea that he basically, committed this extravagant gesture for her, spent, tens of millions of dollars to buy her a star. And so, of course, she feels awful. And again, we see another character who is, put into hibernation, right? The idea is that this project is viewed as potentially being important. And so they need to, send someone into the future who understands the details of it. Unfortunately, after she's already frozen, the launch goes wrong, right? This brain is just kind of slung off into space and no one can really tell.
Yeah. But
Now, she's eventually, we find out that that's not true, but in the moment we think that. And do you want to kind of like get back to the point where she's, woken up?
Yeah, so she like a lot of people in the 21st century when this like imaginary hibernation technology gets invented, it opens the door for them to do intergenerational planning against the alien threat. And so she's one of the people, along with Thomas Wade, to decide the staircase program is important. We should hop into the future and like see if it works, basically. I forget why she goes to the future for the staircase program, right? Like a kind of like long-term planning for it.
I believe so. Yes, she's considered like there's a good chance that this might actually be something that either that or some other project. I can't remember, but it's tangentially related to that.
Yeah, so she wakes up in the future after I think she wakes up in the deterrence era, doesn't she?
Yes, she does.
So she wakes up after the threat's already been dealt with. Humanity is pretty confident that Trisolaris is like not going to invade. They have peace treaties. They have, interplanetary internet with the Sophons. And so her first thing that she does when she opens up, first she checks on the star to see how much it's worth. It's worth a lot. And the second that she does is goes watch a movie made by Trisolarian, basically. Like someone sent them the zip file over the Sophons to watch a movie made on Trisolaris. And all of humanity is pretty convinced that Trisolaris has learned from the superior human culture how not to be so violent and genocidal. Because the movie was a brilliant depiction of culture, understanding human intelligence and everything. Of course, what just to sneak ahead a little bit, what turns out to be the case is that the staircase program succeeded. The Trisolarians got what's his name's brain, built him a clone body without cancer, and essentially used his brain to understand human culture. So all these films and media supposedly made by Trisolarians were actually just made by him, working for the Trisolarians. And because now the Trisolarians have a model of the human brain, they can kind of simulate personality tests on different people. That's how they figured out Luoji would press the button with this like human brain sample that they can like use to simulate personalities. They essentially have like the Trisolarians gain the ability to essentially create a digital clone of anyone they want on the ships and evaluate their psychology on the ship through the brain. Essentially, I'm going a little bit into details hashed out in the like semi-official fourth book, but it's kind of implied within the third book too. And so essentially, humanity through this like media campaign by the Trisolarians decide that maybe maybe we're good, maybe we can just go on with our lives, and they get the really dumb idea to democratize the sword holder position. Democracy. And so what we see is I forget how she becomes so popular though, if you might remember it better, but she basically becomes
if I'm not mistaken, because the star she's been given is worth so much money, she essentially the UN discovers, that it's there's something they want there, and so they offer her, an astronomical sum of money. And again, she, ends up, with her kind of like assigned partner, selling off this star to the UN, and she becomes, fabulously wealthy. And through that, and through some other, I guess, reasons I don't particularly remember, she becomes kind of a media sensation. Because again, it's described the entire time that she's incredibly charming, everyone likes her, and because she's kind of like out of time, she becomes a media sensation.
Yeah, and that's a minor detail brought up that's really important. People from the 21st century have greater gender differences the people of the 23rd century are very paused, very like gender neutral, and so anyone that like actually has like femininity or masculinity is this weird out of culture, out of time sample that gets really popular. So like you basically have these people that are like just normal people to us as like curiosities to the future, and it makes them really popular.
Right. And so essentially what happens is that the society has gained a lot, in the time sense, in the time sense, since Luoji has, entered the deterrence era. And so part of that is that they have advanced on certain civilizational metrics. And one of them is that they've developed this technology, we don't need to get into it, that essentially allows them to make giant antennas. And these antennas, and there are initially planned to be quite a lot of them, can broadcast, the locations, right? This essentially this like nuclear option, to everyone very, very quickly. And so this is essentially like a nuclear silo, so to speak.
Yeah, so Luoji's solution with the dust cloud isn't a permanent one. It never could be. And so instead the Trisolarians agree to help the humans build these silos, like a good word for them. They're radio dishes that can broadcast a signal that Luoji has. And so essentially it's really weird that the Trisolarians are helping build these things that could end their own world. But it's kind of like a peace gesture to help the humans calm down a bit. Eventually, though, some humans get a little genocidal and like push the fucking button already, get it over with, right? And this causes a bit of a fear between both worlds, and so it's decided that the number of broadcast stations should be vastly reduced to a handful. And it's kind of implied that these plots may have been stirred by the Trisolarians to start with, like almost like a return to the old ETO, the human allies of the aliens. It's never directly stated, but I kind of got the sense that like a lot of these attempts to activate the stations were part of Trisolaris's posification of humanity. Like, oh, you humans, you can't be trusted to guard these towers. You can't have as many. Stop being so militant. You're not trustworthy. It's kind of like a projection from the Trisolarians. And so essentially the number of them get reduced because of the fear that some terrorist group might activate them, and some of them get off world and put on some of the ships out in space, so that they're completely out of the reach of humanity.
Right. And so essentially what happens is that when the vote comes up, for who is going to replace Luoji, as the sword holder, there are a number of candidates, right? And the majority of them, it's described, are essentially 21st century men, men who for whatever reason were frozen, and they're described as being, like hard and brooding, kind of like more masculine, hyper masculine compared to these kind of like effete, men of the deterrence era. And prime among them is a character that, was kind of, relevant to the first part of the book, and that's Wade, right? This American spy, and so he basically says, you're to this woman, you're too nice for it. You won't do it. You need someone like me who's a terrible person. And he says that very directly. He basically says like, look, like you need someone who's actually going to do it. And she blows him off. And this culminates that he's so committed to doing this that he actually tries to kill her.
Yeah.
And he basically is like, well, I won't let you do it, because you're the worst person. And the cops end up stopping him. He's sentenced to prison because it's described that they haven't really had a murder in quite a long time, because the state is so good at preventing them that they very rarely have violent crimes. And basically, she is elected as the sword holder. But within moments of her accepting it, they launch a full-scale assault. That these probes basically head straight for all of these antenna, the antenna that still exist.
They basically reduced the number of antennas to the number of probes, and that was the gambit. One probe can destroy each antenna and thereby cut humanity off from being able to conduct any mutually assured destruction. And the story kind of cuts off here to go for a tangent. So we basically end the scene with humanity losing losing the signals. Sorry, my brain's not working so well.
Yeah, no worries, man. And so this brings up another plot point from the last one, right? Which is these few ships that managed to escape, and are headed off into kind of like interstellar space. These were refugees from this initial battle. And again, we see this concept of the dark forest kind of teased when initially these two ships are actually two groups of ships. And in the cold vacuum of space, everyone comes to the realization that, well, in order for some of us to make it, some of us are going to have to die. And so they all turn their guns on each other, right? And
Yeah,
humanity, which at this point is, incredibly paused, is still pursuing these people. Again, because of the distances involved, these pursuits take decades, you know. And so what eventually happens is that one of these ships, and there's been a drama between these two, ships going back and forth. They press the button. So the signal, right? Even though this woman who is essentially too soft to do it, she can't bring herself to press the button. It goes out anyway.
yeah, and it's really cool because like the people that press the button on that ship are 21st century men who were resurrected to like lead the battles because they're still able to do war fighting. So like all the admirals and officers on the ship, or most of them are 21st century men, and they look particularly stronger than the soldiers that they have running the ships. And essentially there's this scene like I said, this after the dishes on Earth are destroyed by the droplets, the probes, it cuts to the ships and kind of their adventures and how, like, for a good part of the book they're focusing on the ships and you don't really know what's happening on Earth. And essentially they present the humans from the 21st century on the ships. The ships finally make contact with each other. There's a whole hula balaba. Essentially they agree not to go back to Earth, and they basically look at the photos of like the droplets coming or something like that. No, sorry, I'm confused again. Because they're further out from Earth, they discover that Trisolaris has in fact launched a new fleet, a second fleet. And Earth hasn't learned about it yet because they're still like a light year away, basically. Like, this is like way the heck out in deep space. And they decide by the time humanity learns about these ships, it's no doubt that like the Trisolarians are playing us. Something's up. So we have a choice to either send the signal before the ships arrive and like mess up the Trisolarian schedules, or go our separate ways and never look back. And it's decided that if the signal isn't sent, humanity is probably going to get wiped out by this second fleet. If the signal is sent, it gives humanity at least a little bit of time to get out of Dodge. At that point, we then cut forward to Earth again, and we find out that since the dishes have been destroyed, humanity's essentially been occupied by this like robot and her droplets, right? We didn't mention the robot at all, did we?
Yeah, so sorry. And again, this is an incredibly complicated series, and so we're trying to kind of get through it as best we can, but we're not doing it justice.
They're dense.
They're dense books, and they're not dense in a useless way. They're dense with useful, like relevant information. But essentially, the Trisolarians have kind of made a robot, an extremely lifelike android, to essentially act as a spokesperson. And this brings up an interesting theme because this this communicant, is basically Japanese. So it turns out that aliens are weebs.
Yeah,
And
it's worth mentioning. The author is Chinese, and he based the Trisolarians largely off of the behaviors of the Japanese during the occupation of China in World War II. And the Japanese have this peculiar behavior where they will not respect you if you can't fight, and if you can fight, you'll earn their respect, but they'll still want to kill you the second you show any weakness. And so this is basically like the ethos of the occupying Trisolarian machines. Again, the fleet. We're going to bounce around a lot here because there's a lot of dense information, but essentially what happens at the same time, the fleet out in deep space discovers the second fleet's traveling at much higher speeds than the first fleet. So rather than taking 400 years, that second fleet's going to get there in 4 years. Their signal to Earth can make it there in 1 year. So essentially, they have like 3 years to figure out what to do. There's a bunch of timelines. I'm messing it up. At the same time, the robot on Earth is essentially the mouthpiece of the droplets, who are now essentially threatening Earth to do what they want or blow up a city. Every time Earth doesn't do what they want, they blow up a city with the droplets. The droplets come in and basically blow up a city. And eventually humanity submits to the droplets. Because again, these are like indestructible machines, and they can travel through anything because they're made of strong forces. And so the robot is basically their mouthpiece, and the droplets of the sword. And so what the droplets demand, what the Tricelerans demand, is all humans have to go to Australia, sentenced to Australia, because the Tricelerans no longer want to wipe humanity out. Now they kind of want to do a reservation system, because the Tricelerans realize it's really useful to have a species that can lie when they can't. So like, the Tricelerans are attempting to co-opt human biology into their empire, because clearly these creatures are capable of destroying them, even though they don't have the same technology. So it's probably useful to keep these things around, but let's limit them to like a few 100,000 on a random island, and just like kind of keep them in reservation. So at the same time, humanity is being forcefully relocated to Australia, and humanity has set up this like caste system. I'm sorry, Tricelerans set up this caste system where like Earth's armies get rewarded for doing their bidding. And so the droplets basically threaten Earth's armies to do what they want, and Triceleran thus invents an invasion army out of humanity, which is kind of it's a clever device. So Tricelerans can't get an army on Earth fast enough. Let's just make the humans into our army by threatening them. And lo and behold, it works. The Tricelerans have a system where Earth's armies do their bidding. Earth's populations get moved to Australia, and the droplets are essentially destroying any city that doesn't want to comply. And this sets up a dictatorship on Earth, ran by humans, but ran by the Tricelerans, but the hands are humans. And it's a really fun thing. And this temporary empire is like kind of colonial empire that the Tricelerans set up on Earth is working. And then they realize that the Triceleran invasion fleet traveling at light speed is on its way, and it kind of looks like, oh crap, we've lost. This is it. Yay, we're not going to get exterminated, but we're going to be reduced to 100,000 people. There's the cannibal scene where the Tricelerans are like, well, the humans are like, how are you going to feed us all on Australia? And the Tricelerans are like, you're made of food. Figure it out yourselves. We don't care. And it's kind of this really disturbing scene where the Tricelerans are once again their vicious, normal way. And once again, a lot of this is based off what Japan did in invading China. Obviously, Japan is a very small empire. It can't rule all of China with its own people. And so Japan set up this like caste system, basically, like as they invaded and took over China. And sometimes you would just like starve a city out and have the inhabitants eat themselves. And there were many famous cases in the invasion of China where Japan basically just forced the city to eat itself, and reduce its population to manageable levels. And so a lot of this is kind of like reevaluating Japan's strategy for conquering China, in terms of how Triceleris conquers Earth with like an android and 12 droplets or something like that. Okay, that's hopefully a normal review. Like that's a broad stroke. It's a very complicated part of the book, and I wanted to just very quickly get it out there so we can get on with it. But to return to the ships that sent the signal, would you like to go into what happens as a result of that signal being sent from the ships?
So, and what happens is, at first, we don't know how these ships were able to send out the signal, because along with the pursuing ship sent out from Earth to bring back these quote unquote war criminals to justice, there is one of these probes as kind of a peace gesture, like, oh, we're both going after this together. And in this frantic race to get to what essentially is quote unquote the button, right, to send out this signal, there's this probe is rushing towards the ship to essentially stop them. They're trying to destroy them. And then all of a sudden, seemingly out of nowhere, it just stops. And this is something that even at this kind of like relatively advanced level of technology, humanity's never been able to do. They simply do not comprehend how they even possibly could stop this probe. But all of a sudden it just stops. And so the signal is sent out, And within, I think it's a few years, right? We find out later. We'll come back to this. But Trisolaris is destroyed, completely demolished. And essentially the way it's done is that a super dense, kind of like rock, for the lack of better terms, is thrown into the sun from someone extremely quickly, and essentially causes the sun to, or one of the suns of Trisolaris, to expand. We're skipping over details, and essentially consume the solar system, right? Like wipes it completely out.
Yeah, and we kind of skipped over, but essentially, as a result of this signal being sent out, Trisolaris realizes that there's no longer any point taking over the Earth because it will soon be destroyed. Trisolaris makes its best efforts to prepare for its own destruction, because Trisolaris now realizes we're doomed too. Like, why would you do this, humanity? You've doomed us both. But Trisolaris also makes a kind of like actual peace gesture, because they respect Luoji, because he was the only human able to contend with them. They tell Luoji, we'll answer 3 questions of yours, bearing that they don't threaten our own existence. We'll give you that. We'll give you 3 pieces of information. Thanks for the death wish, humanity. It was fun. We're both fucked. Have fun. Bye. See you never. And so Luoji asks these 3 questions of like, is there a way to stop a Dark Force strike? Is there a way to like a bunch of questions regarding like how to figure this out? And the Trisolaris are never willing to say too much, because they know that anything they tell humanity might one day come back to bite them, if they ever make contact with humanity again. But this is like essentially the great divorce between humanity and Trisolaris, where they're like, okay, humanity, you press the red button, you fucked us both. We never want to talk to you again. We're gonna leave you on read here out. And so a few years later, Trisolaris blows up in the night sky. Everyone sees it from Earth. The star goes supernova, and we kind of and there's a final meeting with the robot. The robot stays on Earth, obviously. Where she says something along the lines of humanity is like, well, you're still working, so there's clearly some Trisolarians still alive. And she basically says the ones in the first fleet are still alive, and that's it. Right? Like she basically says, and the second fleet, but like the robot reveals there's still Trisolarians out there on the fleets that were sent out, and we never want to talk to you again. You've doomed our worlds. This is it. Bye. Sorry for jumping around so much.
No, not at all, because it's hard to explain this all at once. And so what that essentially leads us to is a kind of a repeat, or a similar situation, where humanity knows that there's a strike coming from somewhere, they don't know where, on the Earth, that will destroy the Earth. And so what they assume, logically enough, is that it'll be the same thing. That a rock, for the sake of simplicity, will be thrown at the sun, which causes a chain reaction, which will kind of blast solar radiation. And so that leads them to to another discussion, right? As a civilization, like, what are we to do? And there are kind of a variety of ideas. One is basically, we're going to have to escape. Okay. 2 is that we're going to hide. And the way we're going to hide is we're going to hide out kind of behind the gas giants, right? We're just going to make these little floating cities, and Jupiter and Saturn and Neptune, they will protect us. We'll hide in their shadow. And there's kind of a running theme throughout these books of what's called escapism, right? And escapism is the idea that we're going to need to leave the solar system. But the reason you can't allow it is that when you escape, only some people can make it. And so obviously, no one wants to deal with the problem of who do you select. So this has been made a extreme moral taboo, on the level of like, rape or incest, anything. Like it is that level of unthinkability. And so what happens is that humanity decides to go with the idea that they're going to hide.
Yeah.
And what happens is, while they were in Australia, as all people were, this woman, whose name I keep forgetting, what's her name again?
AA.
Oh no, not AA. There is a character named AA. She's relevant. We've kind of skipped over her, which is kind of
can we briefly say a kudos to the level of memery this book has to our current era?
Oh yeah, because there is a significant character that we have not mentioned, but is quite relevant called AA, and that's
who,
mildly amusing.
who acts like AA and has the same credentials as
Mannerisms,
AA.
yeah,
No,
they're very
also
similar.
the same degrees as AA. Our AA.
Oh
He's
yeah,
kind of
actually, you're right.
and
Which is just like an amusing, but
and there's also the ship named Bronze Age, which has a literal Bronze Age mindset. And a bunch
okay,
of
that's
people.
actually kind of funny. There are a lot of correlates.
This book predicted the 2010s and the 2020s. I'm convinced it's like some kind of time travel nonsense. But anyway, sorry for cutting you off there. It's just a
And
funny
so to
little.
go back, while they were in Australia, Shenzhen and Thomas Wade, after an attempted murder, end up meeting each other again. So they've established contact. He's served his time, and basically, she understandably feels like a complete failure. She is incredibly rich from selling the star. Her company has become. She started a company that's now become this like industrial giant, but she understandably feels like a pariah. She messed it up. She couldn't. It didn't end up mattering, but she was not up to the task. And so Wade comes back to her and basically says, look, you're not up to this, but give me your resources. Let me do whatever I want with them, and I'll fix this. And she basically says, all right, with a few stipulations. One, you're not going to do anything that harms humanity, which is, again, vague woman stuff. And two, I get a veto on anything we do. She was like, yes, of course.
Thomas Wade made the mistake that many people do while working for the Daily Wire. Let's just say that.
No comment. But, and so what he essentially says is like, all right, and you can sleep and we'll wake you up when something interesting happens. So, she goes back into hibernation and she wakes up on one of these floating cities. Essentially, at this point, I think it's like 75 years, separated. Humanity has almost entirely moved to these kind of like floating cities. And the idea is, these are places where we can hide, and there's an interesting description of all of them. And the reason that she's brought back is it turns out, well, Thomas Wade did what Thomas Wade always did, which is act ruthlessly. And so what he was doing was basically developing faster than light travel. And
which is illegal because humanity doesn't want anyone escaping like those other ships did.
Right, which is highly, highly illegal. And so basically what they do is, and I should say that the reason, one of the most interesting aspects of this third book is that, how we mentioned before that the Chinese incel has been kind of cloned by the Trisolarans.
Yeah.
And his main output there was a series of stories. Right?
Yeah,
and these stories were the way that Trisolarans understood human culture. And it said that he wrote over 100 of these. And they're basically like folk tales, kind of like fairy tales. And all of these were transmitted. And there's a scene kind of close to the end of Trisolarans, leaving, bidding humanity their goodbye, where he has a conversation with this woman. And it's revealed as part of this that the Trisolarans will, if they think that he's revealing too much, they'll basically cut the link. They'll basically, without putting too fine a point on it, they'll basically like blow it up.
Yeah.
And so he gives her a series of kind of cryptic instructions, and cryptic clues. And one of these clues is basically, he says like, oh, do you remember when we used to tell each other stories when we were kids? Now the main character is like, internally, of course, this didn't happen. This isn't true. So she kind of perks up. And this story he tells her is a very elaborate kind of like fairy tale, which we can't really summarize. But buried within that, and this interpretation of this fairy tale essentially becomes a whole discipline of human study. It is a series of principles that become important later. So if you may remember, and I kind of teased this earlier, that there was no one really knew why this probe failed when they were about to send out the signal. And it turns out that just by sheer accident, they came into a area where the fourth dimension was collapsing into the third. So there was kind of little pockets of the fourth dimension. And they were able to essentially, from the fourth dimension, it's described that the third looks like a drawing, right? So there's no such thing as a container. You can see through anything. You can see through the details in anything. And so essentially what happened is not a particularly intelligent strategy, is that they were in an area where you could, standing in certain places, with certain scientific equipment, you could look into any box. And it turns out that this probe was basically a fancy box. And so they just reached into it and rummaged around until it stopped working. Right? But
yeah,
this does
once
indicate,
again, the caveman strategy.
Exactly. But this does indicate, this idea of dimensionality. And when they're in the fourth dimension, what they realize is that this kind of eternal law of entropy, which is kind of one of the most disturbing things about this the scientific universe. And they meet a fourth dimensional being. And the fourth dimensional being essentially tells them, my dimension is collapsing. There will soon be none of me left. And what is essentially revealed is that the dark forest has always existed. And the primary way to sort of attack a civilization is to collapse, to create a collapsing dimension. And this has happened on a universe-wide scale, essentially 9 or 10 times. And so what happens is that when these hunters reach out for Earth, they don't do it the same way they did last time, because it turns out that Earth is more dangerous. What they do is they collapse the Earth into the second dimension. Now we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, because the reason that this woman has been woken up is essentially that Thomas Wade is at it again. And he's essentially in a Ruby Ridge style standoff with the government, where it's been revealed that he's developed faster than light travel through essentially interpreting, these fairy tales into kind of scientific data, which is its own segment of the book that we can't really get into for the sake of time, but it's absolutely fascinating. And basically they woke her up to basically be like, all right, talk this guy down. We can't get him to stop it. He's threatening to do something drastic, but maybe you can talk him down. And again, because Thomas Wade is a man of his word, she does it. She tells him to stop down. She tells him to stand down, give up to the government.
He also had those he had those antimatter guns, you might remember.
Right. So I won't get into that, but essentially he's developed the ability to cause a mass amount of damage. So
he's space big boss. He has this outer heaven with advanced technology.
Yeah, pretty much. It's a good analogy.
And he wants to bring humanity into the next stage of development. He basically found a way to avoid the Sophons, if there's any even still around. And he wants to get humanity out of the solar system, because he doesn't think it's going to be like the other destructions. Humanity has to leave the solar system if it wants to survive.
And so essentially she does it again. She tells him to stand down, and almost at the same time this attack is launched. And at first no one really knows what it is, but what happens is essentially the solar system starts collapsing into the second dimension at a speed that essentially nothing other than faster than light travel can get away from it. It's essentially this sinkhole.
And it's mentioned that people think, well, at first people think that eventually this bomb, it's just going to destroy the sun, will be fine. But it turns out that it will never stop sucking in things around it. It's basically going to keep doing that forever, and that there are a lot of parts of the third dimensional universe that we live in that are like that. And it eventually has turned out, the book postulates that's what dark matter is. Dark matter is collapsed into 2D. Dark matter is the gravity left over from collapsed two-dimensional space, a collapsed three-dimensional space into two-dimensional. And so humanity experiences this slow death over a number of months, basically. And the story basically shifts from over the course of these months, what can be done? Every couple of every couple of parts of the book, another planet sinks into the collapse. Eventually Earth collapses into it. Initially, I forgot the characters, Xing and her assistant AA, they visit Earth one last time to try and figure out solutions, and there's no hope, and so they leave. Turns out Luoji's still alive out in Pluto, trying to collect all of Earth's arts as an arc for when the solar system is gone. You might want to mention like the ship he's on, but basically, even though Thomas Wade eventually gets executed for his crimes, he has this like cigar scene, makes him even more like Big Boss. But
and so what happens, right, is we find out that Thomas Wade actually wins in the end. That in addition to that, he actually made one prototype. He made one, they call them like inertial drives, which is basically a way to cheat the speed of light. And it turns out that in this kind of like odd move, he gave this woman, who's essentially ruined everything, the ability to basically travel anywhere in the universe faster than light. Now, the problem is, right, the laws of relativity still apply, which means that, while for her, very little time is passing, hundreds of years are passing, as far as the universe goes. And so what happened is during this conversation with, the terminal incel, he basically, the last thing he says is like, meet me at our star. So what she basically decides to do is head for the star that, she ended up selling, but let's be honest, they're all dead. So it's hers again, with the expectation that she'll meet this guy again. And when they get there, right, it's habitable. It's a kind of a shitty planet, but nonetheless, they end up meeting, another guy, a guy who turns out is the descendant, because again, hundreds of years have passed, of humanity on these two ships, which means that great, humanity has survived. And he describes the fact that, humanity is still around. Yeah, they're in the stars, but things aren't going so well. It kind of sucks.
Because they haven't found a planet as good as Earth yet. It turns out Earth was literally the best planet in that region of the galaxy, and that's why Tresslaris wanted it, and there really isn't anything like it. And so humanity's kind of scratching a living off of these planets that are like near Earth's, but they're like, heavy gravity, low gravity, health problems. Humanity is essentially like scratching a living off of rocks, and they don't really know what to do. Sorry.
Right. And so what is the second kind of like major reveal is that whereas there is an attack, right, which is collapsing a dimension, there is also essentially an ultimate defense. And the ultimate defense is kind of this devil's bargain, where, and we won't get into the science because one, it's fake science, and two, I can't remember it, where basically you can put a hard cap, you can limit the speed of light within a certain area. And so the upside to that is that it basically stops the ability of anyone reaching out to destroy you. They can't do it. It basically creates a black hole from the outside looking in. But on the inside, again, it limits the speed of light, which means computers don't work. You're never getting out. And so essentially it's an ultimate turtle strategy. And what is revealed is that kind of like through this strange series of events, which again, we're over time, so I'm kind of skimming over, one of these is created. And so this new man and this woman are separated and essentially cast forward, millions of years in time, again, because of the way relativity works, traveling faster than light. And they're again stuck in this black hole. They're never getting out until. Do you want to pick up here, Luthemplar?
Yeah, sorry, we've been skipping around a lot. I'm trying to follow it myself. It is a very dense book, but
it's very dense, and we're over time, and I don't quite want to do a third episode, but I also don't want to be here for 3 hours.
Yeah, we're close enough to the end that we could basically just say it. This microcosm that they find, well, we should have said it was from the incel character who stayed on the fleet of the Tresslarians and eventually got off with a lot of their technology. One of them was these little pocket universes, and he basically invites her to enjoy a pocket universe with whoever she wants. They get separated, so it can't be him. Poor incel boyfriend. Eternal incel. But she falls into this pocket dimension with the other human remnant, and they just decide to live for 18 million years in a paused time area, and like have a happy life with a copy of the Sophon robot that was from before. And they just live there. They dream it, and until eventually a signal comes in from the outside saying, there's too much matter in these pocket universes. Please empty them immediately. And at this point, it gets very, in my opinion, the story kind of jumps the shark here. It doesn't really have a lot of like consistency here, but essentially the story ends with them leaving the pocket universe into the main universe once more, with the hope that maybe the universe has collapsed enough that it will somehow restart.
There will be a new Big Bang. And so I agree that the ending kind of sucks, but there's kind of this moment, right, where it's revealed that, they aren't the only ones who've thought of this pocket universe strategy, but there's an attempt made to kind of broadcast, someone out there, broadcasting to all these pocket universes, basically saying like, you guys need to come back or it won't start over. The universe will just die. There'll be no second one. And that's so it creates this kind of like cosmic, like high score billboard where the basically thousands of languages from all of these civilizations are sent out. And it says, it describes there's days and days of the simple message in thousands upon thousands of different languages. But it's revealed that both, human language and Trisolaran made it, which means that, even though our main characters missed it, both of those civilizations at least lasted long enough to be considered significant. So that's kind of the end. And I don't love the ending. I'd say out of all of them, you kind of have to read all of them to get the full story. And there are parts of the first and third book that are amazing. But to me, the second is my favorite. This kind of like advanced game theory, kind of like mapping out like how do you beat, this kind of like unwinnable foe with limited resources, I think is very interesting. So are there kind of, broad themes you want to, examine with Luthemplar as we kind of, wrap this up? Are you still there? I don't. Oh, sorry, we're having some technical difficulties. Hey, can you hear me? Yeah, you're back.
It was a lightning strike here.
No worries.
What were you up to?
No. So we have finished the plot summary. I'm asking if there are any themes you want to talk about kind of over the course of the whole series.
Yeah, so I think that like this is basically the Kruger effect graph, Dunning-Kruger effect applied to a story, where like humanity consistently thinks it's like the top-notch best, and then reveals that the universe is more complicated than they assumed. And then there's always that like adaptation phase when it's never quite a perfect fit, but it works. I think my favorite thing about the story was that it does create a powerful, believable explanation for the what do you call it, the paradox, you can't see any alien life. There doesn't seem to be any alien life. On one of my Substack posts was basically going through all the metrics that you could find alien life with, and how they're all, no matter how complicated or simple, they're all negative. There really is, at this point it does seem like we're the only life in the universe, like as if either they're hiding or they don't exist. And this story provides a really good explanation for why they would be hiding. There are little like things that happen in this book that kind of tickle your noggin if you notice them. Like at one point we do see the aliens we assume are the ones sending the dimensional collapse to Earth, like the weapon that will destroy it. But if you look at the dating for every chapter opens with like a date of when it's happening, because it's such a long time span. It's actually dated to a year after the solar system was destroyed, and so it's kind of implied that the alien we're seeing prepare this doomsday weapon to destroy the Earth, it's actually late. That weapon's going to arrive to an already destroyed solar system. And so it's just like that brutal out there. I think also another thing that's really cool, like the fact that all those languages are presented at the end kind of does mean that near the end of the universe, aliens were like, all the civilizations, including humanity, were kind of like forced to work together to figure out how to stop the cold death, the cold death of the universe. So like given enough constraints, life will forcefully be forced to work together. And so, in those languages, you see not only humanity languages, but also Trisolarans. So it implies that at some point in time, Trisolarans and humanity did manage to actually live in peace. So it's very dark. It's very, very dark, but it also has that little like bit of hope at the end that like, yeah, well, eventually the universe is going to get to such a state that you have to work together. I don't know. There's a lot of, what are some themes you picked up on this trilogy?
So one of the things I think is interesting is that, especially in the third book, there's kind of this recurring theme of, pragmatism, right? The idea that this kind of like squishy liberal values, if you follow them in a time of necessity, will continually screw you over.
Yeah.
So there's this kind of vacillation between humanity becoming kind of decadent and then getting smacked down. And then once they kind of regain confidence, they become decadent again and they lose their practicality and then they get smacked down again. And so you see this specifically in the character of Thomas Wade. There's also this kind of recurring theme of great men being hated, right? So men who do the difficult thing, who do what needs to be done, are continually
Yeah.
social pariahs.
That's really important because like a lot of people in this side think, oh, like Caesar will be popular, Caesar will be loved by the people. In reality, any Caesarian figure in history, even if they accomplish their goals, they're always hated, they're always killed, they're always spit on. Like, you will not save people and be loved.
Right. And I think there's also a strong theme, and we mentioned this the first time, of the different roles of men and women.
Oh yeah.
And specifically the chaos that, allowing women to lead in times of crisis can cause.
Yeah, like this book is very Chinese traditional gender roles. Like, women will end your civilization if you put them in control. and well, like if you read the reviews of this book, it's very popular in China and it's very criticized in the West, and these are the reasons why. Like this book spits on the face of Western values, basically.
Right. And I think also it's a profoundly, I don't know, it's a profoundly Chinese book. And so it's interesting because, again, the characters don't react in ways that you would imagine Westerners would. And I think it's interesting just alone for that. So again, I'm not trying to take up a lot of time because, I've got to go sooner or later and we're already over time. But I consider this just a full recommend from me. You guys should read this book. There are free audiobooks available on YouTube, if you care to look for them. And it's probably the first piece of sci-fi I've read written after the Cold War that's really, truly good. It's worth your time. I hope that this is kind of a primer because we didn't cover everything. There are definitely things that we had to skim over either for time, or to kind of explain it in a roughly linear way. But I would say, this is wholeheartedly worth your time, guys.
Yeah, yeah, same for me. I mean, I only discovered this book this year. Oh, rather last year. It was recommended to me. I forget who recommended it to me, but I really like I mean, there are Western characters in here, but they're kind of like, they are a bit exaggerated, in a respectable way that make you kind of reevaluate yourself. I think a lot of Westerners have this assumption that they are the neutral culture and everything
Mhm.
around them is like a flavor, and they're neutral. Like the West has achieved true neutrality, true objectivity, even though they deny both. Um, and this book does a good job of explaining why the Western individualist view is just another flavor that has its own faults, and it's useful sometimes, but it has its own faults in sometimes.
Yeah, I think that's well said, and it does a good job of it's kind of a counter to the baby boomer view that, essentially they're just like us. That every culture is essentially the same, and what they really just want is to be American. They want our stuff. They want to come to America and buy pickup trucks and consume. And this is good because it shows you that, you know, civilizations are fundamentally different, and that different types of civilizations and different types of biology produce radically different outcomes. Like, obviously there is an alien civilization that is so alien that they don't even have a concept of falsehood, right? And so again, like, this book is simultaneously like a mix of based and cringe. Like, it does have a strong materialist atheist streak in it. Like, religious people are dumb and crazy, but there's a lot to be had from this book. And even just as like an entertainment product, it is very fun to read. It's probably more literary than most sci-fi. Like, he's a good writer. It's always difficult in translation, but nonetheless, right, there is a lot of, like, it can be in many places just like a very beautiful read.
Yeah. There was this really cool post on a blog somewhere, where someone took the the Chinese of the Trisilurian response in the first book, and ran it through all the ways you could theoretically translate it into English. And a lot of them are radically different than what is in the book officially. And it kind of makes you realize, like, you're not just translating from Chinese to English, you're translating like imagine, it's kind of implied, well, imagine how different it would be if Trisilurian was real. Yeah, I mean, a full recommend for me. It's about like maybe like you can listen to it in about a few hours every week of every day of a week, and get done in a week. It's a nice long read, and I think by the end of it, you're going to look at the night sky at night and think think a few things you haven't thought before.
Yeah, so guys, check this one out. And again, thank you so much for coming on, Luthemplar. I know this is a lot of your time.
Yeah.
So if people want to find more of your work, obviously you don't primarily cover sci-fi, but where can people find you?
Luthnight.substack.com, which should be linked here somewhere. I think I sent to you last time, or I can send it again. That I like to write on Substack, and I like to make AI art on the Telegram. And well, hopefully I'll be doing more creative stuff. I'm just kind of like sick right now.
Well, fair enough, man. And again, like I enjoy having you on, and obviously this is something that I have to thank you for, because I read the first book when it first was translated, and it just didn't stick with me for whatever reason. And I'm really glad that I went back to it. It stuck in my brain for a long time, which is pretty rare, because I read a lot, and oftentimes, like, if something isn't particularly like interesting, it just kind of comes in one ear and out the other. So again, thank you so much for showing this to me. And obviously, guys, Luthemplar's links are down in the description. You can check him out. And as far as my links, right, like, where to find me. This is on YouTube. Yeah. You can also find it on Apple, Spotify, anywhere you listen to audio only shows. In addition, you should check me out on Twitter. I've been getting a massive, influx of new people. I cannot comment on the quality of my Twitter account, but it is there. So how's that for a
for all your Rod Gear takes? That's what I follow for. I follow for all the
you mean not for me just retweeting the most rancid, like, shitlib takes that I find?
Yeah,
I'm like, they have to read this.
I'm just here pissing off everyone if I can. But yeah, I mean, hopefully in the future I'll have a few more sci-fi recommendations. I have a very rich library of weird and curious books like this.
I've got an idea. You know what I'm going to make you do?
What?
Have you read Gene Wolfe yet?
This sounds familiar. Tell me more.
Gene Wolfe has a series. Oh, what is it called? The Something of the New Sun. Sorry, let me look up exactly what it is before I tell you wrong. Gene Wolfe. It is. Oh yeah, the book of the New Sun.
You might tell me this, actually. I'll look it up.
Read that. Come back here, and we'll have another conversation on it, because yes. It is my favorite sci-fi. It's 100% the opposite direction. It is super surreal and very weird. But you know what? Yeah, in chat, Perplexity says, I'm reading it right now. It's fantastic.
Nice.
So you should come back and read that. It's a little bit shorter, but it's extremely weird. And we should have a discussion on that, because I want to have you back on, and I want to talk more about literature, because this is not well known, but I probably am, if I could be considered to actually know what I'm talking about in any field, it's literature. And so I want to bring that more onto the show. Anyway, guys, like I said, we're gonna have to wrap this one up. But check me out, obviously, on YouTube, Spotify, Apple. I'm running a promotion now where if you guys send me a screenshot, of you reviewing the Jay Burden Show on Apple, Spotify, anywhere you review podcasts, you will be entered in to win a $50 gift card to Antelope Hill Publishing, right, which has lots of great books. And anyway, guys, thank you so much for coming out. And remember, keep your head up, guys. The lie can't last forever. Good night.